What's it going to take for you guys to be okay tonight and to stop this chaos?
It ain't me. It's not me. I'm going to let y'all know that now. It's not us guys neither. And I'm glad that y'all said that. It's not us. It's the police. It's the madness that they spark up. This is what they encourage. This is what they provoke. This is what you get out of you taking a loved one from someone. This is what you get. You get a lot of people that's hurt, and they can't fix the right way. They can't no longer depend on the police to be here to protect us like they say they gonna do. So this is what you get. And no, it's not gonna end today. I can't tell you it's gonna end tomorrow. I don't know when it's gonna end. But it's for y'all to start. We're not the ones that's killing us. Y'all killing us. We can't make a change if y'all don't change.
I'm not saying that I haven't acknowledged the fires at the riots. I just think it's not your place to condemn a people when you've played a part of the system that has been leaking gasoline all over their streets. If riots are the language of the unheard, I wonder what is it that becomes lost in translation as cries for justice falls on seemingly deaf ears? How long does inequity have to ring in staccato because the sound no longer reverberates through dog whistle? Like forests, we are burning, but they brush us off, neglect how far hate can spread, then find new ways to contain us and blame us, then bury us, didn't know we were seeds. All the while, America tries to uproot us like we be the weeds. Although we've been treated like shit, we fertilized her soil, tended to her branches, never to grasp or taste the ripened fruits of our labor. We savor quiet moments of peace. But even then, we're unarmed black women shot and killed in our sleep. Or black men that simply jog down the street. So yeah, I've seen the fires at the riots. But the property damage be nickel and dime compared to the cost of black bodies to burn in the fire next time. This time, we're dying slowly from racism smoke as it finds home in our lungs, while onlookers simply admire its embers and have the audacity to question why we say, I can't breathe.
Good afternoon. My name is Kishmar Best, and I serve as the Director for the Office of Graduate Diversity Initiatives in the Graduate School here at the University of Florida. It is my pleasure to welcome you back from intermission and to kick off this afternoon's activities. In 1961, during an interview, Baldwin was asked about being Black in America. The response remains one of my favorite Baldwin quotes. Baldwin said that to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time and in one's work. But Baldwin also went on to highlight the criminal indifference of many white people in this country and warned against simplifying the challenges facing Black people in the hopes of having them recognized. A generation later, in 2020, we continue to grapple with systemic racism and white supremacy. I challenge us all to recognize the many identities and perspectives within the Black experience and to appreciate the complexity of the issues that we face. I challenge members of the Black community to avoid sitting in our respective privileges and sources of power within white supremacy, whether it's being a man, being heterosexual, being cisgender, being able-bodied, being a US citizen, or being formally educated with multiple degrees. We need to be inclusive of all of us in this fight. I challenge white allies to never remain indifferent, to recognize that racism and white supremacy ultimately endanger everyone. And until we are all free, no one is truly free. Up next, we'll have a panel of graduate students from the departments of Anthropology, English, and Journalism, sharing their thoughts on the future of Blackness at the University of Florida. Following the panel, there will be a dance performance entitled An Image of Africa, and then a Q&A session with Asubi Craig, Director of the Center for Arts, Migration, and Entrepreneurship. I'm pleased to introduce Cristovão Nwachukwu, who will be the chair for the graduate student panel.
I'm a third-year PhD student at the English department, and today I'm going to be the moderator of the graduate student panel. So I'm going to start by just explaining a little bit some of the purpose of the panel and how we are going to conduct our discussion today. So basically, originally this idea was for us, like graduate students, the initial purpose was for us to continue the scholarly discussions that James Baldwin and Chinua Achebe had back in 1980 at the African Literature Association Conference. And then because of now the event is being virtual, as you could see, now we are going to base our discussions more on our lived experiences. We are still going to be related to what Chinua Achebe and Baldwin said, not directly, because we are going to discuss our lived experiences as Black graduate students at UF and also as a student of color at UF, and then discuss issues pertaining to Blackness, how is it to navigate UF as a Black scholar, how we conduct our research along those issues, and also offer suggestions for UF to accommodate Black graduate students, like international students and students of color, to actually set forth some of the goals, some of the ideas that the activists James Baldwin and Chinua Achebe had in their initial meeting back in 1980. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the discussion. So basically, now I'm going to talk a little bit more about myself, and then I'm going to ask my fellow panelists to do the same. So I was born in Brazil, but my family is from Nigeria. I'm a first generation Brazilian. I hold a BA in Portuguese and English language and literature from the Federal University of Bahia in Brazil. Currently, I'm a third year English PhD student at the University of Florida. I studied the strategies Black African writers employ to represent the differences and similarities amongst Black peoples across the diaspora in African novels. My primary area of research is in African literatures with secondary interest in postcolonial studies, migration studies, and gender studies. Okay. So now I'm going to ask La-Toya, who gave the beautiful spoken word performance, to do the same, and then afterwards our fellow panelists. La-Toya.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is La-Toya Scott. I was born in Bronx, New York. I am first generation. My family's from Jamaica. My mom's from St. Elizabeth, Jamaica, and my dad is from Spanish Town. I got my bachelor's degree from Florida State University, so who knows, and that was in English literature. And then I got my master's from University of South Florida in English literature as well. Currently, I'm a second year PhD student that's specializing in critical race theory. Most importantly, I'm looking into Black feminist and womanist studies. And I also have a growing interest in looking at safe spaces for Black people in the United States and pop culture.
Thank you so much, La-Toya. Mustapha?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mustapha Mohammed, and I'm from Kumasi in Ghana. I obtained my BA in MPhil at the University of Ghana. Currently, I'm a doctoral candidate in the Department of Anthropology here at UF. I also teach Akan language for the Center for African Studies here. And my research investigates the relationship between iron working and social change in northern Ghana during the Middle Ages, and the Middle Ages is between 500 BC and 1400 AD. That's basically all about me.
Thank you, Mustapha. Romy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Romy Rajan from India, and I'm from the English department. I work with Indian and Kenyan literatures, and my focus is on the liberalization of economies across both countries and the ways in which literature responds to both of these literature responds to these events. So I look at the imposition of neoliberalism in both of these countries through a comparative framework. I look at aesthetics as a way in which you can understand the everyday experience of neoliberalism in these countries.
Thank you, Romy and Yewande.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yewande. Born in Brooklyn, raised in Atlanta. I'm a Nigerian American. I hold a BS in journalism from Florida A&M University, so go Rattlers. I have a master's in liberal studies, history from Clayton State University, a master's in public health from UF, and I'm currently in the 4th year of my communications doctoral program. My research interests revolve around the convergence of communication, identity, and health. And I'm working on the cultural communication study on substance abuse in Nigeria. I was actually planning to be there collecting data on a Fulbright, but life and COVID have brought other options. So I'm going to be finishing that up in the swamp and encouraging anyone here on the live who is unaware to look up the hashtag InSARS to learn more about what's presently going on in Nigeria.
Thank you, Wanda, especially for the reminder, which is like very important and also aligned with our discussion today. Thank you so much. Now let's start our discussion. So basically each question is going to take, we are going to respond and I'm going to open. So like anyone, when I ask the question, anyone in the panel can start the discussion, then we are going to have start this conversation, okay? So the first question is, so how did you become, for the panelists, how did you become aware of the different types of Blackness? Was it related to your research or lived experiences? Anyone that wants to answer can start.
Okay, I'll jump in here. I think my family and my life became a model for learning about different iterations of Blackness. My mother is a Black American from Harlem. My father has since departed, but from Nigeria, Ibadan, Nigeria. And so I looked like everyone I was around growing up in Atlanta, but I had this funny sounding name. And, you know, I like to eat ackee and saltfish with my cousins and, you know, amala and pounded yam with my dad, and understanding these very strange but different distinctions in knowing that I'm Black, but understanding that there's almost like an othering that takes place in how I almost self-identify.
That's very good. And also, I also relate a lot with what Yewande has said, because I myself, as I have just spoken, that I was, my family is from Nigeria, but I was born in Brazil. And I grew up being raised by a Nigerian single mother. So the costumes that we had, the values that we had at home were very different from like the Brazilian population, even though I was born in Salvador, Bahia, which has the greatest amount of Black people outside of African regions. At the same time, I could notice that I was everybody always told me when I was growing up, oh, you like different, you have like the same thing, you have different like surnames. Usually my teachers always struggled, okay, so your name is Cristovão and what? Nwachukwu, how do you pronounce that? So I also noticed that, okay, so I'm Black like a lot of people here, but at the same time I'm very different. So yes, so who else wants to answer the question?
Well, growing up from Kumasi, and I had wanted to put my submission here like into this broader context of how social enculturation and social identity is formed, and how then you become aware of yourself and how you even see other people as different from you. And basically it's the same thing that happens to other people too. So it is the same process that goes on with other people and how they also see you as different from them. For me, as from who is from West Africa, most of our social identity and enculturation begins with our interaction with colonialism, right? And I've had some students who would always argue that why don't we leave history behind us and move forward? But that's very simplistic, because colonialism continued to shape our behavior and identity creation and all of that. But here's the deal, right? Society is made up of elements, and they are all intertwined together, and what affects one element affects the other element. And if you like, anthropologists will put them into broader components: the sociological component, ideological component, and technological component, right? Now, any change within any of these components will affect the other. What happens is that the ideological one is the one that has a lot of it, that if you are able to affect the ideological component of a society, you put that society on autopilot for yourself. And colonialists understood this. So that's why they did that. Even though they were in Africa for our resources, they ended up affecting our ideological component of our society, where they put us on autopilot. So for example, today there's no colonialists in Africa, but we follow the dictates of colonialism to the latter. We are not being forced, right? But that is because they've changed our idea, our ideology, and all that. But to summarize how I was seen within my environment, when a child is born in Africa, is given a name, right? And based on your colonial interaction and your ideology, you're either given a Muslim name or a Christian name. And that's the beginning of social identification for that particular child, right? So right there, the individual is taught how to identify him or herself and to also recognize other people. So for me, as someone from Kumasi, but with a Muslim name, I was still seen as the other, right? And I have like two examples that as we move forward, I probably will share with people, which even though I'm from Kumasi native, I was seen as the other because of my name, right?
This is a very, thank you for the contextualization, Mustapha. And also, just speaking about my experience growing up in Brazil, especially my research, I was interested in studying like African literatures, especially like Nigerian literature, because one of the effects of colonization in Brazil is that we don't have as much representation of Black people in literary studies. Most of the authors that we study, like from our education, both in like schools, high schools, and also in college, are going to be white male authors. And I said, okay, so what are the Black authors? What about like the African authors that I could like study? How could I relate to it? I didn't see myself. And then, for instance, I only read Chinua after college. After I finished college, and then I got in contact with his work. Then that's why, okay, so I want to know more. That's what informed my research. And yeah, thank you again, Mustapha, for your contribution. And La-Toya, how do you relate to? How did you become aware of different types of Blackness?
So I was gonna say you really don't know you're Black until somebody else lets you know. So, well, at least it was like that for me. Coming from a Caribbean family, trying to make a home in a space that they had just migrated to, I knew that my family was Jamaican, and it's kind of minute, but it was a big thing for me, where the social conditioning to let you know that your other started within the school system. So checking my language at first, the way that I said things, as simple as like vegetable or comfortable, you know. And so, you know, somebody had to tell me, you're in America, that's not how we say things, you know? And so even things such as that nature, that seemed minute, were things that let me know that not only was I Black, but I was also coming from a Caribbean family. So there's so many intersecting identities that made me more cognizant of my Blackness and different types of Blackness.
That's great, La-Toya. And Romy, as a person of color, how did you become aware of different types of Blackness?
I will kind of piggyback of some parts of what Mustapha was saying, precisely because I'm from a post-colonial society as well. And as a post-colonial society, there is no nation that is non-black, but still a society of color. There are highly racialized and distorted images of blackness that you actually receive, and that's how you initially encounter blackness. So, my first encounter with, people of African origin was the West Indies cricket team, which was composed mostly of Afro-Caribbean players and, a lot of players of Indian origin as well. So there was this image of, the black person as somebody who was, and this was coming through media, as somebody who was always singing calypso songs and, chugging beer and, dancing. And so that was one image of blackness that I encountered as a child. And the other image was from, all of these UNICEF, UNESCO cards where, you had the African who was malnourished, undereducated, just another way of saying, uncivilized, quote unquote. So those were kind of like the distorted, highly racialized ideas of blackness that you're kind of fed when you are even in a post-colonial society. And it's also interesting because, you were consuming all of these images while living in a highly, let's say, anti-black society.
And that's also very interesting because even though Brazil is also like a post-colonial society, it's not post-coloniality is not something that we discuss as much as we should in Brazil. And then in Brazil, we also, even though like a lot of like there's a great amount of the population that is black, we also grew up with these kind of images as like black people. Usually they are the maid, like black women are the maid, and like black people are usually thieves or like dangerous and everything. And rarely you see like a really real diversity in literature and also in media of black people being represented in like different lights in different ways and also represented by black people themselves. So yeah, thank you for your contribution. Any other responses to Romy and the other considerations about the first question?
I feel it important to articulate something in particular, and that is kind of an oppositional framework to blackness as a native of Atlanta. I think that Atlanta is one of those at the time when I was growing up, almost felt like an oasis in a very dry region of representation in terms of the range of what you see in blackness. It was a fairly dominantly black city, black leadership. So I didn't ascribe those types of qualities, or more denigrated version of self as a result of that upbringing. I was just mentioning this earlier this week, and of course I'm teaching on art, identity, and health, about how even my books, the fairy tales, I was given books that were coming from a black-owned bookstore. And so, I always thought Rumpelstiltskin was black, and, Alice in Wonderland was black. And, and it took going to school and the U.S. public school system to kind of break me out of that, like, oh no, you thought that was the default, but this is the actual default that exists. But certainly some of the images that are perpetuated that you've discussed, I had a slightly different experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because when I was growing up, being raised by my Nigerian mother, the images that I had about Nigeria were that she went to like university, and most of like my parents and also most of my family are college educated and was fine. And also I went to Lagos when I was like really young, and then it was just like a normal city. And then I said, yeah, like my family is like from Nigeria and everything. People, oh, so you have like elephants on the road? And like, how do I have that? And then I understood this kind of like difference between how I was raised, how I actually had the experience of like being like going to Africa and knowing like being raised like in a completely different way, and what the images of Africa that people had. Any other considerations about the first question?
Well, I think I relate pretty much to what Yewande was saying about Atlanta, but for pretty much in West Africa, you see most people are black. And so that idea of blackness do not even come into your head. But then it's the concept of the other that I pretty much mentioned, that you are enculturated to adapt. And pretty much, like I said, all coming out of colonial construction. So, for example, when I was at University of Ghana, there was an interview I attended, and the professor looked at my CV and said, "Your name is Mustapha, and you said you come from Kumasi." And I said, "Yeah, Mustapha is not a Ghanaian name; it's an Arabic name, and it's coming out of the orientation of my parents who gave it to me. So it doesn't mean whether I come from Southern Ghana or I come from Northern Ghana, I could have that name." But because of the colonial interaction Ghana had, where you have the Muslims infiltrating the country from the northern part of the country, and Europeans also coming through the southern part of the southern coast, and a wrong impression is created, and that identity is formulated that the northern part is Muslim and the southern part is Christian. And so if you have a Muslim name, then automatically you are put in the north. Where you have a Christian name, then you are situated in the south. So that identity creation, then you begin to see, oh, even though I come from here, they are putting me here. And there was an embarrassing situation where at UF here, one of the summers, we have what we call athlete teaching here, and a friend that came from a different university was asking me, "Hey, where do you come from, Ghana?" I said, "I'm from Kumasi." And there's a Ghanaian lady that said, "No, he's not from Kumasi, he's from somewhere else." She assumed that she knows me more better than I do myself because of my name. So that is the dichotomy in West Africa. You do not grow up to know other Blackness, but you grow up to know other people, even within the same family, based on your ideological subscription.
Thank you so much, Mustapha, for sharing that with us. And also, thank you, because this potential is related to the second question that I had for the panel today. What is it like being a Black scholar at UF? I'm going to direct this question firstly to La-Toya. So what is it like being like a Black scholar at UF?
I think that's a very complex question. It really makes me think about what does it mean to be a Black scholar at a predominantly white institution, and what is it that's available as far as resources that are going to help you to further your interest as a Black scholar. While I was in search of an institution, it was important to me that even though I would be attending a predominantly white institution, that I could find spaces of Blackness in which I wouldn't feel like I was on an island. First coming in, starting my first year, which was last year, I was lucky that I saw other people that came into my cohort that looked like me. So I did not feel alone. But then also experiencing and seeing things on campus that were kind of unsettling. It was uncomfortable at times.
And Yewande, would you like to respond to what La-Toya has just shared with us?
I share pieces of those sentiments. Yeah, I think being a Black scholar at UF, it can be isolating. It can be lonely, if I can be frank. It almost feels like kind of like a quiet communion. You have these whispered gatherings and like social moments that are like very sparingly occur, and you tap in when you can, and you get what you need while you can. And this is not to be like judgmental of any existing communities that are here, that exist as Black spaces, whether I'm a part of them or not. But I think I'm used to a much bolder, Blacker environment, coming from HBCU environment for university. So it's different.
Mm-hmm. And Romy, so how is it to be like a person of color at UF? How would you describe it?
I'd actually rather talk about, I mean, what it is like to be an Indian scholar of Black studies, if that's okay.
Okay, yes,
So,
fine.
I mean, like both La-Toya and Yewande spoke. I mean, it's not exactly. I mean, one of the things that I do find good at UF is that there are actually, if not spaces of social community as a person of color working with Black studies, then at least there is a lot of intellectual community that I can find in terms of, just meetings of the African Studies quarterly review meetings. Those are great. And also other barazas that I have been able to attend in the last few years. But as somebody who is Indian and working on uh, Kenyan literature in this uh, university, one of the things that I do find very interesting as an Indian scholar is that I do find welcome in these spaces where African scholars are talking about different kinds of issues, but the reverse is not always true. So when you're talking about cultural traffic, it's almost entirely a one-way situation. So it's always a situation of being conflicted as an Indian scholar because you don't really know whether you're offering the same kind of welcome to African scholars who might wish to do the reverse, which is to, I mean, work on Indian literature for that matter. So it's not a two-way street, and that's something that I'm often kind of concerned about as a scholar. And it's also kind of conflicting because when I was in Delhi as a scholar, working on African literature, there were, I mean, multiple attacks that were happening on African students who were studying in Delhi and other parts of India as well. So uh, it's a situation of privilege to be even a post-colonial subject of color to be studying African literature while knowing that the reverse is not always an option for African, students.
Mhm. Thank you, Romy, for sharing that with us. And Mustapha,
I will say it's hard to explain how you feel as a scholar in UF from West Africa, and I always use West Africa because I want to make it broader. But if I want, as a scholar from Ghana, because you come in with a background that is entirely different from what you see here. And so you begin to navigate around that, how to be able to catch up with what is going on here. But at the same time, you also do not have the same support that you have if you were to be in Ghana or in your own space. And so it becomes a very difficult situation. So the system here is very different. How studies is conducted is different. How research is conducted is different. The interaction between students and professors are different. And you have to navigate all around this, right? And so if you do not have that support system, then it becomes very depressing. And I know a lot of people from West Africa comes and find this difficulty while studying in UF and even in the US as, I mean, if you're looking at it as a larger context.
it's good that you mentioned that. So Yewande, do you find that UF has like usually, do you have any support systems, support networks that you feel like it's a like safe space that you resort to? You do?
I had the luxury of participating in the Office of Graduate Diversity's kind of introductory program for those starting in their doctoral programs. And I think if I didn't have that leg up, I would have been behind because it was an introduction to a lot of the resources that are on campus. And it does function as a space of kind of like, whew, I need to go into a room and be able to decompress with someone that I trust or with a group of people that I trust that are understanding and can be compassionate. So I would say that that is definitely a resource. And we all, in some ways, have been resources to each other, whether we know it or not, informally or formally, So.
Thank you. And La-Toya, do you have like any resources that you resort to to give you a sense of community? You have?
I definitely look towards the people, mostly Black women, to be honest, that are in my cohort right now. And then also connecting with people from OGDI has been very helpful. And then as far as resources, just making sure that I find safe places outside of the institutionalized setting that keeps me going for when I have to come back to academia and participate the way that will get you what you need and make the experience as fruitful as possible.
Yes, thank you, La-Toya, for your contribution to the discussion. And also, I myself find it sometimes challenging and also sometimes rewarding. Challenging because of the interactions, sometimes because I'm like not only like a Black graduate student, but also I'm an international Black graduate student. So what happens a lot, and this is something that I think other like Black international students will share, is that sometimes like you as citizens are not, sometimes they are not as understanding as they could be about cultural differences. So for instance, of course, I speak English, I'm fluent, I speak English with an accent. And like at certain points, I think there was a coworker of mine that used to like laugh at my accent, make fun of my accent, which was not, it took me some time to realize that, oh, this person is kind of actually fun of me because my accent, oh, you like speak very funny. And I'm able to communicate in English, I'm able to teach in English. And then that person saw as a question of the region. So which made me very uncomfortable. And then, yeah, so sometimes it can be challenging for this kind of situation. And also, but it can also be rewarding because here at UF, I'm doing something that I didn't have the opportunity to do at my alma mater, which is I am being able to, in my department, at least I'm being able to teach African literature. And also, especially this semester, I'm teaching like on the course about immigrant experiences. So I'm relating to some of my experiences as an immigrant, a Black immigrant in the U.S., and also having like, the safe space for my students to learn a lot about African cultures, African literatures, which is like it has been the best experience I could have. Like I'm just so grateful to have to be able to teach African literatures because it's really a work of passion for me. So yeah, sometimes there are just challenges and also some other also points. So any other considerations about the second question that anyone in the panel would like to share?
I saw something in our comments from Corey Williams. Did we acknowledge that? I found the latter part of it interesting. So it says, I can identify with how trying to find Blackness or areas of culture that feels inclusive to you. I am a U.S. Marine and a Black Marine. Trying to find communities of Black Marines within the Marines is hard to find. You know that you are a part of the program, but the program does nothing to accommodate to make you feel inclusive. So I was just wondering, even in reference to that, within our own programs, what do we do in order to kind of activate this inclusiveness in that space? I'm sorry if I asked another question that wasn't like.
No, that's okay. Actually we're here to discuss.
Yeah, that part was important because even personally for me, even if I was speaking outside of the Black women that look like me as a form of support, there's also people within my program that don't look like me where they're open to ideas of inclusiveness. So even if you feel like you may have to walk on eggshells, pitch something, talk to the people that are actually running these programs and see where, and I'm not saying put extra labor on yourself because you know how that can be, but have a conversation. And I find that a lot of people in my program have conversation when it comes to inclusiveness.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mustapha, you want to say something?
I think I like the fact that he described it as inclusiveness, and like we have been saying, even at UF navigating around as West African student, I had to rely so much on my professors, because then you didn't find that kind of in people including you into their fold. You cannot identify with various, even Black groups that you thought would have accepted you. For example, if you look at the Ghanaian community here, how do you fit in, right? And like I gave that background. So if you have like a Ghanaian community that's like 98% different ideology from what they perceive you to be, because I personally probably not religious, but they will not know that, right? And so that exclusion is there based on that dichotomy that I earlier on elaborated. And so you have to find solace with people who are like-mindedness, and people who share your idea, people who will happy to be with you or to help you. And mostly I found that with my professors who are white, not Blacks, right? And folk students. The only problem that I had later with some of my colleagues who were students was, in every culture you have ways of having that kind of fun of the other people, the other in code, right? And so sometimes you kind of realize some of the stereotypes against West Africans and all that. And so then it made me feel uncomfortable again, having to rely on them. And I'll give you an example. These are like, for example, Africans, we speak English based on our first language. So for example, a Ghanaian will say, I'm going to come, which is like, I'll be with you soon or shortly. But because of the influence of the Akan language and several other indigenous language, we say, I'm going to come. An American doesn't say that. So when you begin to speak that kind of English and your colleagues silently or secretly behind you, maybe discuss that. And so later when you discover that, it becomes a lot, you then lose that kind of confidence, share being with them and all that. So, but inclusiveness is transcend Blackness, transcend borders, and you can find inclusiveness with people people you even think will not be tolerant to you.
Yes, thank you, Mustapha, for giving us like this conceptualization based on your lived experiences, which brings me to the last question that we're going to discuss today. So for the panel, how do you envision the future of Blackness? Like also related to how could UF be more supportive of Black scholars and Black scholars of color? So how do we envision the future of Blackness? Specifically.
I think with the time and the space that we're in, I see at UF just being more cognizant of the humanity of the Black people that walk about this campus. So I think most times with academia, it can be so sterilized that when you're walking about this community, people only consider your status as a student. But when you're outside of this bubble and you leave your classes, there is so much that's going on that is a threat to your Blackness, and then you're supposed to turn it off when you enter back into the classroom and just operate as a student. But what I see, and I see kind of a turn that's going even speaking just specifically to my department, us trying to humanize the experience even of academia. So, for example, going into this semester, I knew that there was a lot of things that needed to be spoken about. And I had a conversation with somebody in my department, and I said, I would like to teach a class called The Racialized Other, and talking about the movement and talking about things in this socio-political time. And they were open to that, and I got to teach that. So opening up spaces and communities within classrooms to talk about the experience, to have conversations that people are probably scared to have or don't have a space in order to have these conversations, right? So I just see more things being spoken about, especially towards the complexities of the Black experience. And so it won't be so sterilized when you operate as a student, right? Because you're also Black and you're also around Black people. And now we're in the age of, Black Lives Matter, and there's a lot of things going on. You can't just ignore that. And then you add the pandemic on top of that, right? So it's being cognizant and aware of these experiences and incorporating that into the classroom. And then even looking at the text that you bring in, right? Where everything's not so whitewashed, or you're becoming more diverse within your materials, things such as that nature.
Yeah, and also like speaking to La-Toya, I have a very similar experience with La-Toya, because also this semester, as I said before, I got the opportunity to teach a class about immigrant experiences. So like I always have pedagogy in my pedagogical goals, diversity in mind. So I really chose made the conscious choice to have mostly like Black African writers and mostly like Black female African writers. And then the response from my students, and then of course I'm having like very complex conversations about immigration, about the discourses about around immigration that are happening across the U.S. right now, and also in Europe, in several European countries. But my students were so open-minded in terms of discussing those texts, and also responded so well to texts that were diverse. There were some like even students of like Indian descent that we studied. I think the name of the author is Shaujya Patel, and then she was telling I think she her response said, "Oh, that's great because she's from the same ethnic group that I am." And then she was able to really relate to that, and also students sent me an email saying that it's great that we can actually like read this kind of text because students respond to it. Sometimes they relate to it, and then if we have the spaces to discuss these issues, it's going to be great. Especially, life should be reflected in the classroom. It shouldn't be separate. And then it's great, especially us like having Black graduate students and students of color have the opportunity to teach something that is related to what's happening at the time, what's happening currently. So yeah, and then Yewande, what do you your answer to the question?
I view the future of Blackness with a certain level of optimism. I guess that I'm just a glass half full type of person. And for me, that looks like similar to what a lot of you have already stated, being able to invigorate syllabi with scholars outside of the conventional canon and bring in resources that instigate types of conversations that we likely wouldn't have been having in years prior, and being able to invite more scholars of color and Black scholars within the UF landscape so that we don't put, excuse me, that complicated unspoken pressure on the few Black faculty that are here. I don't know if you all can speak to this, but it's kind of like, it's so refreshing to see a Black faculty member that it's almost kind of like you get giddy and you're like, okay, do I take this further? You know, let's see what are the interpersonal, what's the interpersonal overlap? What do we have that's mutually, we can relate to? And then I also think about the fact that, like, okay, what was their discipline? Am I going to be putting them in a position where they can't be as productive because they have this kind of silent allegiance to mentoring that their colleagues don't have to, perform in certain ways? So, when you have enough, when you have more people in that space that represent that type of relationship model, then you can, redistribute the weight, the burden, so to speak. Uh, I see a relationship between scholarship and social justice, and so I think that it has to. We live in the ivory tower, and there is a purpose behind, and a purpose and a method to the madness of creating scholarship and research. That's the nature of what we're doing here. But if it's only to exist in, obscure, then certainly it's not being put to greater, purpose. So being able to communicate with networks of people in policy, in social justice, to use the scholarship in a more practical and useful way to improve life. So that's how I see the future of Blackness when in the context of UF, being able to have more scholars to rely on and more of a collaborative network within academia and outside that will instigate some sort of positive change for those that experience marginalization and oppression as a result of their Black skin worldwide.
Thank you, Yewande, for sharing this perspective with us. Romy, how would you respond to the question?
As far as the future of Black studies is concerned, I was really interested in what La-Toya was talking about when it comes to the distinction, that is the artificial distinction that is always drawn between being a teacher and being a Black person in that sense, right? Where you're told that, and this is something that you see even as far as industry practices of the academia are concerned as well, where if you are, say, somebody who works in African literature, you cannot, be a integral part of a conversation on, say, something like the history of the novel, which is supposed to be kind of like the regular sort of conversation. And I find that very interesting. So what I see as the future of something like that is, you know, to think about the future of Black studies in terms of collaboration. So what happens when you think about, say, the African Studies Center in terms of something that is an active conversation with the Center for Latin American Studies, or something that is an active collaboration with, especially at UF, because the UF Center for Latin American Studies has this excellent archive of the Panama Canal and the work that was happening there, and so much conversations that can happen at a rather global level when it comes to understanding the future of Blackness and Black studies as well. So that's something that I found very interesting. Or even collaborations with the Center for European Studies, where you can talk about the changing kind of demographics within Europe when it comes to understanding Blackness of different types. And that kind of ties into what we were talking about in the first question as well, about multiple kinds of Blackness. So collaboration is something that I kind of see as, not, if not the future of Blackness, not to put too much pressure on it, but a future of Blackness or Black studies.
Yeah, especially Romy, I really like what you said about like collaborating with like different branches, different branches of UF, especially like for example the Center for European Studies, because usually I think people only associate like Europe with whiteness, and then that's not accurate. In the 21st century, there is like also diversity in Europe, even though sometimes it's not spoken about. That's a very good point that you made. And Mustapha, how would you respond to the question?
Well, I would like to take it from the student perspective, because most panelists have already discussed about how there should be increase in Black professors and all that. And I also like Romy's idea of collaboration, because even in terms of talking about student unions, then you still have that kind of a lot of differences between Black unions. So for example, you have the African Student Union, you have the Black Graduate Student Union and all of that. And so when I first got here, trying to find I'm in a situation and people that would accept me. I went to the Black Student Union, then I realized, well, here I don't fit in. Then I go to ASU, and ASU, I was active in ASU for a very long time until I realized that there's this dichotomy between graduate students and undergraduate students here in the US. Then I was like, okay, so why don't the graduate students who feel they don't want to be part of the undergraduate union, why don't you become part of them and then nurture them and bring them up? So I do not see the need for that kind of categorization, too much categorization within the Black folks. So it is important that we begin to collaborate with each other so that even if graduate students feel like they don't want to be part of ASU, they still come form an alliance with them, invite them for their program, also go to their program so that it becomes like a space where we all share ideas and also share experiences, and the young ones can learn from the older generation. And I think this is very, very important for people who be coming from spaces like myself that came and had to struggle to find an identity for myself.
That's great. Any other responses before we open the discussion to questions? Any other responses to what Mustapha said? Any other considerations? Yewande, you were.
Sorry, I don't want to just leave Mustapha out there like that. Because I do feel a sense of kinship in trying to understand community and how identity really does shift according to the environment. And I don't want you to think that you're the only one that has that experience, because there's othering that takes place I experience it frequently as well. Like understanding that you do have the BGSO community there and wanting to be able to take part and engage in a certain way, and then missing some of that, that's the African spiritedness of that specific community, and then going to that community and recognizing the ways in which you may not show up as authentically as how we have conventions about what's considered African or not, so I understand you there.
I mean, it's a lot with exclusion and inclusion and all that. And I've been very vocal recently about inclusiveness and exclusionness of people. And I think most of maybe what I'll do after school will largely relate to this. Unfortunately, personally, I am very pessimistic about the future of Blackness because of institutional challenges and structures that are in place that I think is going to be very, very difficult to surmount in the very near future. But we can do a lot to limit the impact of it, the gravity of how it impacts African students and Black students and all that. So I think with scholars like you coming up and all that, we will be able to, but we also need to get the right perspective from scholars. Mostly you find, today we're talking about Achebe and Badu, right? Mm-hmm. It's very, very difficult for an African student to be introduced to African writers, and like Cristovão indicated earlier. So most of our education is based on colonial legacies. You learn about Gettysburg, you learn about Christopher Columbus as African, as West African, and you are never introduced to your own people, how great they were and all that. So for me, even as an anthropologist coming to the US, history begins from European interaction. And then you have to come here and discover that, wow, there are a lot to that. And some of us had almost like mental paralysis because of some of this identification. And I'm not shy to say this because I don't think I'm the first scholar to have been very surprised to find some of the things in the literature that I never knew coming from Africa. I think if you look at the first president of Senegal, the union they formed in Paris in France, the Nitrigil movement or whatever, my French is not good, but Nitrigil movement or whatever, it was as a result of them coming together and discovering the fact that there were a lot that they didn't know coming from Africa. And they were shocked. And I was also shocked a lot. I mean, I was taken aback when I discovered so many things when I got here. And so we have a lot to do as Black scholars. And I think most of the things that will help is what Romy elaborated, collaboration.
Yes, and just to wrap up our discussion and open for questions, thank you so much, Mustapha, and everyone for your contributions. Just like what Mustapha said, really highlights the importance of making knowledge accessible, not only about Africa, not only about Black people, but also composed by Black people. So like representation matters, and then access to knowledge, making knowledge really accessible to the general population, not only at UF, but also outside of UF. So our work has an impact more than outside of the framework of academia. It's like really important for us to like start the discussions and then really make like academic studies relevant to society. So thank you so much for each and every one of you, each of your perspectives and everything that you shared. So now we are going to have still like around 24 minutes. So let's open for questions. So if you have any questions, please post it on the chat so we can answer, continue our discussion. Right, let me see if you have it. I think someone asked, but this was earlier, how do you engage with African American graduate students?
Yeah, I think that's from Dr. Canton, the director of the African American Studies program. Thanks for tuning in. I think I'm the resident African American on this phone, or I don't know if you explicitly to African Americans or if that was just a catch-all phrase, which we tend to do in the U.S. when it comes to Blackness. I think that BGSO and OGDI are great resources in terms of engaging with African American graduate students. The OGDI is normally the first kind of point of contact for anyone that identifies as a person of color entering into a doctoral program specifically. So they are definitely a great resource, both of those.
Anyone in the panel that would like to answer the question, how do you engage with other African students?
You could also invite them to research with you or collaborate on a project. That's always a nice way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, like me personally, I had the opportunity to teach a class. I was teaching Toni Morrison's Sacks Beloved, and I invited like an African American student that is like a scholar, a specialist in Toni Morrison, and the class was excellent. It was great. So usually like collaboration really helps, and then my students loved it. So I think it was like very nice. But what about the others? What are your experiences engaging with African American graduate students?
I'm by no means an expert on something like this.
Is that coming from?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just about to say that, I mean, I'm by no means an expert, and I'm not really sure whether there are any reading groups or anything of that sort, but I just feel that something like that would be a really good way of kind of bringing together scholarship on something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Reading group would be nice, like more collaborations with other Black scholars. And La-Toya, you want to say something?
I was gonna say, is this in context of like in the classroom or on, I'm walking campus and I see some African American graduate students? Like, how do I what's the context in which this engagement is being had?
I think it's from the question, I think it's a very general engagement. If you could expand on
Okay, I was gonna speak to. Okay, I was gonna speak to like in the classroom, and then also in what from what positionality. So, within the classroom, just acknowledging that you do have Black students in the classroom. I saw it very helpful, especially at a predominantly white institution, to have a moment before you even start your lessons to create a safe space, right? And to engage in community. So it's not putting your African American student on the spot, but it's giving like having like a wellness check, to make sure that everybody is humanized even through that experience. I saw that as very important, and it also goes into some of the pedagogy that you see even Bell Hooks practices, teaching community within the classroom. You need to teach community, and you also need to teach to transgress. So if you practice that within a classroom, you're going to create engagement with Black students as well. And noticing that it's not just a monologue or a take, but or a dominant, inferior relationship with your graduate students that are Black. So I think even those small practices within the classroom, you're not only making engagement, but you're also making a safe space to be Black within a classroom in a predominantly white institution like UF.
That's great, and also you touch upon like a topic that is probably my favorite one, which is pedagogy. And then I think Brenda Schaffing's question like really is related to that. So can you say more about teaching Black undergraduates at UF and your experiences in the classroom as a teacher and mentor? So I'm also going to open this. Since La-Toya already started, I started the discussion. So what are your experiences teaching like Black undergraduate students?
Man, speaking earlier to what Yewande was talking about, when you have Black instructors and that are a part of your faculty and staff, you're not understanding that they're doing extra work, more so than their white counterparts, especially if they have Black students within their classroom. Because not only now are you possibly their first Black teacher that they've ever had, but now because you are a Black face that they recognize, they're going to come to you. They're going to stay after more in class. They're going to come to office hours. And it's not even to ask you about lessons. It's just to be in your presence. And that, even though it's very endearing, it's also extra labor that we put in, right? So that has been an experience that I've not only been through at University of South Florida, teaching freshman composition classes, or even now at University of Florida, University of South Florida, then University of Florida. It's something that it's becoming a regular thing. You're doing more labor because you have Black undergrads that you're now a unicorn, right? And they need a space to talk about. Am I lying? I'm not lying. they need a safe space to experience what it's like to be even in the presence of another Black instructor, a Black person that doesn't look like their janitor, right? That's around the school. And it but I'm not gonna go there. I'm just gonna lay it out there. So that put that out there real quick. And that's something I've experienced as an undergrad student. So even flipping it, I know, and that's why I offer my time, because I know what it's like to walk an institution and the only Black people that work there looks like the janitor or the person that's mopping the floors. So when I experience seeing a professor that is Black, and I go to them after class, I just want to sit there and know, okay, what is it like to be in this position and you're teaching me and this and the other, but then also flipping it and now realizing the labor that they had to put in on top of operating as a Black professor and operating as a Black person within a white faculty and fighting just to survive
in that space?
I struggle with that. And I really do feel like it has a lot to do with my HBCU training. And I was the beneficiary of people that were just willing to go above and beyond to make sure that I was successful, even if it meant, having me over their homes, staying late in offices, reading over statements. And I feel indebted. And it's with gratitude that I, perform in these ways to be able to fill in the gap in the same way I felt as was done for me, while recognizing how it is a bit of a time snatcher and it does compromise, what I'm able to do in terms of the levels of productivity that I'm able to achieve. And then I struggle with trying not to put pressure, like respectability politics pressure on Black students to, run faster, jump higher, and remain entrenched in some of those ideals about how you have to overachieve in order to have a stake in the game in traditionally white spaces. So I think those are the two things that I keep at the forefront in my mind. And we might be having different conversations if academia was willing to restructure the way that they assess tenureship and really look at service as a legitimate way of promotion.
Yes. Very good.
I feel that.
Yeah, that's great.
I feel that.
Mustapha, would you like to respond to?
There's a question that Dr. Coley was asking about UF students, what UF students play in National Black Graduate Association. I don't know, that was a question I had wanted to comment about it, but I honestly, I do not know the role that UF African or Black students play in the National Black Graduates Association. But like I said, even with African Student Union, it's still not being well patronized by graduate students because they feel that kind of resentment, that kind of like that dichotomy between the graduate student and undergraduate student, which I feel like it's far-fetched. So I think in the first place, we need to enhance that. There should be a way that, I don't know where it's going to come from, but there should be a way that ASU should be enhanced. And from there, if we bring in more graduate participation, I think the issue of National Black Graduates Association will come in and all that. We'll be able to figure that out. But for now, we don't even have a strong ASU.
Yes, that's a very good point. There was a question that I'm sorry, I think I skipped. Now, like Corey Williams, she's a writer in Gainesville, and then she asked before she made a statement below that I agree with forming a tight alliance among the Black groups on campus to cut down on the struggle to find their campus happiness. Going forward, how can local Black writers be involved within the university as mentors to welcome new Africans and Blacks to the area? I think this is a great question. So, to the table. So, any ideas that we could any suggestions that we could offer?
In some ways, I think this is going on anyway. There are these informal communities that function to welcome people that belong where they belong or that fall into where they feel they fit most authentically. And I see this a lot, notably with the friends that I do have that are international African students coming in and just being kind of like an informal orientation. It's like, yeah, this is where you buy your food stuff from your place. Like, this is where, we meet up to do this. Is this how we establish community? And maybe it could be advantageous to build a component or build out some way of the experience of acculturating into these new environments, either as Black people from the continent, as international students, Black people that are new to this type of rigorous academic environment, just allowing that to be a medium of expression and yeah, tool.
Romy, do you have any suggestions about any responses to Corey Williams' question? How can local Black writers be involved with the university as mentors to welcome new Africans and Blacks area?
I think one of the ways in which one can do that, and I think the effort needs to come as much from the students themselves as it does from the community, because I mean, Gainesville, for instance, is not exactly a particularly affluent city, and also even within that kind of a situation, the eastern half of Gainesville is about as not affluent as it can be. So I think the onus should be in a large sense on students themselves to make sure that you reach out, because there are a large number of organizations that actually do work to improve school education in East Gainesville, and there are a large number of other organizations like the Civic Media Center and a large number of these kind of platforms where you can engage both with local writers as well as kind of make sure that there are common platforms for new Black residents to kind of be a part of the society.
Yeah, I also agree that it should be that you have to create more opportunities to engage not only people in academia but outside of academia to actually engage people from create really a community that surrounds it's part of UF. So there are people that come here to study, and there are people that are from Gainesville, so they should also be part of these conversations. I also have another question by Professor Gonzalez. She asks, in your opinions, what it would look like to make UF at both the program and institutional level a more sustaining educational space for Black students? So I know that our conversation is revolving around that. So any other suggestions, any other thoughts that we have?
Give your students some money, okay? To be honest, okay? There is so much money that's going into things like robots and machines on campus. But there are actual people, and it'll help with UF's image, with UF having sent out a solidarity statement after what happened with George Floyd, to actually put the money where their mouth is, right? And fund some of these projects that Black students are doing during this time under this space of racial duress, right? And allowing to not have to worry about where next meal is coming, right? Or am I going to have enough funding to finish my program? Or I wish I had funding to do something that bridges my studies in an institutionalized setting with my community. So finding a way to do that.
Yewande, would you like to respond?
I'm snapping in agreement. I'm affirming you because I certainly do believe in that. And I think about the fact that there is a lot of money poured into the hard sciences, but there's nothing, I think we operate with this sense that hard sciences navigate their research with as if they're unbiased or with some sense of neutrality. But we understand, especially you as someone that's in critical race scholarship, race is embedded in every single thing. I mean, we can all look at algorithms of oppression. We can look at facial recognition software and the ways in which it disenfranchises people of certain complexions. There's always a way to meld in ways to consider Blackness, humanities, social sciences, other fields that don't get the same level of attention financially with those that do.
And I think some of this money could also be put into making sure that there are pedagogic models. And this also goes back to what Professor Shalfin was talking about, ensuring that, there's money that is put into actually thinking and kind of funding research into pedagogy that helps teach Black students at UF as well.
Mustapha, would you like to respond to the question? Any suggestions?
I think I pretty much agree with Yewande and La-Toya about looking for funding for Black students and all that. I really struggle to get funding for my research, and at a point I was even getting like discouraged to even write more, to do more applications. But later I realized that no anthropology scholar from Ghana got certain grants that I was applying for. So also you then become aware that certain grants are for certain category of people, and it will be interesting to know that there's a grant for West Africans that West Africans are not qualified to access it. And it's right here, you see it all the time. It's like for West African research, but if you're from West Africa, you are not qualified to even apply to that particular grant. So it becomes very difficult for African scholars in UF to access funding for their research. It's also good to have this kind of informal orientation between students, because if some of this information are shared to incoming students or students who just got in, then they grow from that. They get to know that there are certain category of funding that you should not even waste your time applying for. Also, if I was introduced to that earlier on, I wouldn't have maybe done certain things that I did. So it is great to have that kind of informal conversation between Black students. How it's going to happen? Dr. Odutola keep asking that, because I think there should be a way that maybe, I don't know, if Center for African Studies is going to take that leadership to create a platform for Black students to be able to have informal conversations among each other and all that. Baraza helps a lot, where we get to meet each other, but also I think we can go beyond that to create more platforms where students can have that kind of not academic or conversation, you know. So I think that's my.
Yeah, so I agree with you that funding and other opportunities for like Black scholars, like citizens of color, like really important to support our research, not only in terms of like, oh yes, we support you, okay, so, but also funding is like really like we should everybody invest. So we only have like 3 more minutes. There is like a question that I think would be interesting to close with. So anyone that can make like a concise answer to the question. So Karen Cooker asks, so why did each of you want to pursue a PhD program, and how does that intersect with your layer varied experience of activities of Blackness? So anyone to like give like a quick answer for us to like close the discussion for today? I don't know if we are going to have time for each of us to answer this very loaded question, but anyone.
Very loaded.
It's very loaded.
Yes. So
I think because I was just, are we answering it, or
yeah,
now,
let's say if
are
you
we
can like
answering
close
the question?
Yeah, just like
Yeah.
for 1 minute. Yeah.
I think because I wanted to continue to be a part of the change that I want to see, especially in an institutional setting where there's not many that look like me. So I want to be able to not only change the face of academia, where it's just old white men literature, but I want to talk about Blackness. I want to talk about race. I want to talk about intersectional things as a Black woman. And that's what I want to see. Make an impact that connects also with my community.
Any responses to what La-Toya said?
I think I feel similarly. More so that I felt like I wanted to write myself into existence in a very specific space. I recognize that there are not a lot of Black scholars in academia percentage-wise, and even less that really straddle the dichotomy of Black American culture and Nigerian culture. And I wanted to see what that looked like. I wanted to probe the way that I look at the world and allow it to inform research questions and a research agenda that will outlast, you know, whatever I can do on this earth, I guess.
And then thank you so much, Yewande, and everyone. Like, thank you, Yewande, La-Toya, Mustapha, Romy. Thank you so much for like participating in this panel. I really hope that like the UF community felt represented to everything that we said, and also that other people that are in the position that they can like do some changes. They listen to us, and then they can implement the changes, because this is not only a discussion. We also want to see the changes in the future for us to be really included in this community, really included in the AF community, make it really diverse and inclusive. So thank you so much. And then we are wrapping up our discussion for today. Like the next event is going to be a performance. So then, but that's it. Thank you all for watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristovão,
Bye,
for leading
everyone.
too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.